Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Senegal announces a record seizure of cocaine, the most ever intercepted on land by authorities. Over a ton of the illicit drug has been confiscated from a truck travelling near the border with Mali. Also, as Sudan's war continues its destructive descent, the second year of the conflict sees a mounting humanitarian crisis that has hollowed out hopes for peace amidst the civil clashes between the warring generals. And a decade on from the abduction that brought Nigeria's struggle with school kidnappings to the world's attention, 100 girls remain in captivities, and families affected by the stolen children of Chibok continue to wrestle with their anguish. But first, authorities in Senegal say that they've seized the largest on-land cocaine haul ever intercepted in the country's history. The operation headed off a truck carrying more than a ton of concealed cocaine in the southeastern border town of Kidira. The discovery is reckoned to be worth over 137 million euros. Large drug seizures are becoming increasingly common in Senegal. The Sam Brad piece tells us.
1,137 kilograms of cocaine valued at some 137 million euros were found stashed in bags in the hidden compartment of the bottom of the truck. Authorities say it was driven into Senegal from a neighbouring country, and it was intercepted at a town near the Malian border. It was the largest ever cocaine seizure to take place on Senegalese soil. Drug traffickers have often used West Africa as an important transit zone for bringing cocaine from South America before shifting it onwards towards Europe. Increased production and increased demand in recent years has only amplified this phenomenon. Senegal, for example, has seen an increasing frequency of big drug hauls. In November last year, the Senegalese Navy intercepted 3 tons of cocaine in a ship off the coast of Senegal, and the following month there was another major successful anti-drug operation. As always, with drug trafficking, it's difficult to say whether the increased frequency of seizures is a result of increased policing or increased trafficking. The real answer is probably a mixture of both.
Sam Bradpiece there for us in Dakar. Now, at least 58 people have been killed in a fortnight of flooding in Tanzania. Coastal communities have been hit the hardest, with authorities estimating that over 126,000 people have been affected by the deluges that are expected to only peak towards the end of the month. Disaster management teams have been racing to get supplies to those who need them the most, and people living in flood-prone areas have been urged to move. Going forward, the government said that it plans to build 14 dams to mitigate the growing risk of flooding in East Africa. Now, the world continues to take stock of the fallout of one of its most brutal conflicts. Sudan's civil war, entering its second year since renewed fighting broke out between the army and the RSF paramilitary last April. More than 8 million people have fled their homes, more than 14,000 killed. The actual death toll could be much higher, as it's still nearly impossible for observers to verify the extent of the loss of life. 25 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, with nearly 18 million facing the risk of famine. Our regional correspondent spoke to the ICRC aid organisation in Nairobi about Sudan's humanitarian emergency.
The situation in Sudan right now, after a year of conflict, is basically we have 8.5 million of people displaced in the country, about 2 million outside, the rest inside the country. People are struggling with their daily life. They are lacking access to food, to water, to healthcare, to safety. So it's really a very grim picture that we're seeing at the moment, and we don't see any sign of hope.
And what are the main challenges when it comes to providing aid to Sudan?
So we need to ensure that humanitarian actors can pass checkpoints. We need to ensure that roads are safe, that goods are available for all the people who require this assistance, especially across the country, not just in some areas. We need to ensure that fighting is not occurring where humanitarian assistance must actually reach the population. Before providing aid, it's really the situation of the Sudanese themselves and their capacity to access the most basic, whether it's food and water, because price or good scarcity. It's like access to safety, it's access to healthcare with like people who have been struggling to get a surgery, or people who are really like unable to get access to the most basic medicine. It's people like unable to get information. We have full families, 20 people who are missing since months now, and their relatives are trying to get information, but they don't have the means. So it's like all these different aspects of access that are really the main issue for Sudanese. And for humanitarian actors, it's basically like capacity to deliver assistance in the right place in due time.
And what do you think needs to be done to facilitate access to aid in Sudan?
Well, it's for all the parties, state and non-state actors involved in the conflict to facilitate this access. That's the most important thing that needs to happen right now.
Olivia Bizo there speaking to the ICRC in Nairobi about Sudan's deepening humanitarian crisis. Now, Niger is moving ever closer to Russia in its reliance on Moscow's support to battle a decade-old Islamist insurgency across the Sahel. Now, Russia sent military instructors and equipment over to the West African nation last week. Meanwhile, demonstrations of frustration with Niamey's disintegrating security partnership with France and the US continue to grow. Our team reports.
Thousands of Nigerians took to the streets of capital city Niamey over the weekend in protest against the American military's presence in the country. Demonstrators want Niger to expand its alliances as it struggles to tackle a decade-long security crisis.
We're urging the government to engage with Iran, with Turkey, North Korea, China, Russia, and all nations. Even if it means dealing with the devil, the government is free to do so, and no American or imperialist has the right to come and give us a moral lesson.
Russia wasted no time in answering the call. Earlier in April, Niamey welcomed around 100 Russian military instructors and gear as part of a renewed cooperation between the two countries. Supporters of the ruling junta are expecting a lot from this deepening relationship.
We expect a genuine collaboration from them, unlike that of the French and the Americans. We expect them to assist us with weapons. We expect from them massive investments in Niger to tackle the employment crisis.
Russia's gaining popularity among civilians that support military regimes in Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso. Yet on the ground, Russian soldiers, just like Russian Wagner mercenaries before them, will likely face similar challenges as American and French forces that have tried to take on extremist fighters in the Sahel. The area is as big as Europe, and jihadists and criminal groups know it better than foreign forces.
Well, campaigning season's begun in Chad ahead of May 6th presidential elections, after 10 candidates, including two fierce opponents of the military regime, were barred from running last month. Only 10 candidates remain, amongst them the transitional president and the prime minister of the transitional government. Clem Balla tells us more.
They are 10 vying for Chad's highest political office. On Sunday, the presidential candidates began touring the country in a bid to win over voters. Among the favorites is General Mahamat Idriss Déby. The 40-year-old was appointed head of state by 15 generals on the 20th of April 2021, following the death of his father, President Idriss Déby Itno, who held the reins of the country for over 30 years. The general initially promised to return to civilian rule within 18 months and told the African Union he would not stand for election as president. However, he extended the transition period by 2 more years and announced in March he would run.
Just as I respected my commitments during the transition, I will respect my commitments if I'm elected President of the Republic of Chad on May the 6th.
Another favorite is Succès Masra, Prime Minister of the transitional government. A former executive of the African Development Bank, he left his post in 2018 and subsequently became one of Chad's main opposition members. He fled the country following the bloody protest of October 20th, 2022, which saw hundreds killed by police and at least 1,000 others imprisoned. The authorities acknowledge only around 50 deaths. Masra returned to the country in November last year, 3 days after signing a reconciliation agreement with the junta, granting amnesty to all the October 20th demonstrators.
Today we're in the majority, and I'd say we're the slight favorites. The various polls, including all the media, including the latest, including the most secret, predict us as winners in the first round.
The presidential campaign is taking place amid tense circumstances, marked in particular by the death of Yaya Dillo nearly 2 months ago. Cousin and vehement critic of Mahamat Idriss Déby, he was killed in February during an assault on his home. The first round of the presidential election is scheduled for the 6th of May.
Clem Valadez with that breakdown. Now, 10 years have passed since Nigeria's most infamous mass kidnapping, when Boko Haram fighters seized 276 girls from their school in Chibok. 10 years during which the security situation has deteriorated even further, and mass abductions have become increasingly frequent. Laurent Berstecker has more.
10 years after her daughter's abduction, Mary Shetima still gets her hopes up every time she hears the sound of a creaking door.
Whenever I hear footsteps, I think it's my daughter coming back. Sometimes I let my hair loose and I imagine her braiding them. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting.
On April 14th, 2014, Boko Haram fighters kidnapped 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria's Chibok province. The mass abduction sparked a wave of international solidarity under the slogan, "Bring back our girls," but the support of Hollywood celebrities did little to facilitate the girls' return, and a decade later, nearly 100 are still reported missing.
We have failed them, the government has failed them, the international community has failed them, everyone has failed the girls. There is no doubt about it.
The others fled, were rescued by the military, or exchanged for ransom by their kidnappers. Grace spent 3 years as a Boko Haram captive. She's now 27 years old and is studying to become a nurse, but the young woman still struggles to turn the page on her traumatic past.
These people destroyed my life. If they hadn't taken me to the bush, my life would have been completely different.
In the Chibok Girls' Secondary School, which reopened in 2021, the ruins of the classrooms and dormitories torched by Boko Haram a decade ago are still visible. And despite a reinforced security presence, the region continues to face frequent terrorist attacks and a resurgence of mass abductions. More than 1,700 school children have been kidnapped in Nigeria in the past 10 years.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
kuwa gatanu nimugoroba hamaze gukereyo ku isabato imodoka haza imodoka y'umweru irimo bivumu niho baturasiye abapfa barapfa abakira barakira.
3 decades ago, the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsi shocked the world.
94, c'est l'année zéro, qui a rasé tout, qui a rasé nos vies, on n'est pas les seuls. Le génocide, c'était un ouragan qui dévaste tout, absolument tout. Et il n'en reste quasi rien.
This documentary takes you from France to Rwanda, following the perpetrators of the unthinkable and the survivors, still fighting for justice to be done.
Le procès, c'est ce qui va rendre aux rescapés la dignité qu'ils ont perdue pendant ce génocide.
Rwanda, the hunt for genocidaires, a story of courage and commitment to bring the truth to light on France 24.